for all of you who know Bill, if I may say Bill, and Ned, you know that they're pretty good at chatting. So I'm just gonna do a quick little intro. But Dr. Stixrud is a clinical neuropsychologist with almost 40 years of working with kids, teens, and their families. And Ned is the president of Prep Matters, a renowned education company down the street. My son might be there right now, actually, that helps kids succeed in high school and get into college. Ned is an amazing coach who provides parents and teens with guidance. Their new workbook that we have stacks of over here ready for you. It's called The 7 Principles for Raising a Self-Driven Child, is a thoughtful and empowering invitation to pause, reflect, and reconnect. And that is what I have always loved about Ned and Bill and their advice and their words of wisdom. Their focus is always about connection with our kids, and in doing that, we are able to help them learn to succeed on their own. For years, as the on-parenting editor at the Post, I leaned on Bill and Ned for their advice and guidance. I look back today and there were a lot of bylines by you and a lot of interviews with you. And for years, as a mother of 2 now teenage boys, I listened to what they had to say, the words they wrote, and the interesting conversations that I was lucky enough to have with them definitely guided me throughout the years with my kids, and will for a few more years at least. So I consider myself very lucky to have been a beneficiary of their words, and I'm so looking forward to hearing what you all have to say tonight, and excited to hear what you all have to ask. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
And take it away.
Thank you so much for that very sweet introduction. Pleasure to be here. And I will say that in the introduction, I've been a neuropsychologist for almost 40 years. Well, that's a few years ago. But I've done this long enough now that I tested, right before the pandemic, I tested these 3 boys who, they were sitting across the table from me. And they looked over to their right, and they saw a picture of me in a tuxedo and my daughter in a wedding gown. And well, this is right. But and all 3 kids said, "You got married?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I did like 40 years." And all 3 kids said, "You married your daughter?" And one of these kids, one of the 3 kids who said that, he had the savant ability that if you told him what your birth date is, he could tell you what day of the week it was. So I get to work, and a couple of psychology associates had tried it out, and we were like in their 20s or 30s. And he said, "He nailed it, Bill. Go ahead and do it." So the kid said, when were you born?" I said, "November 11th, 1949. The kid thought for a minute, and he said, 1940s? I can't go back that far." So it's humbling, but it's all good. It's all good. So Ned and I, after the Self-Driven Child, our first book came out in 2018, we just gave dozens of lectures in this area, and we were around the country as well before the pandemic, but a lot here. And we noticed that there's this woman who, I tested her kids, I knew her, and she came to 4 of our lectures. And so after the 4th one, I said, "Why do you keep coming? It's the same talk, same joke, basically, you know." And she said, when I hear you guys talk, I feel so calm, I feel so centered, and I feel okay about my kid. And she said, then I get home, and I'll talk to, my kid will screw something up, or I'll talk to another parent whose kid's doing much better than mine, and then I get really anxious again. And so I come to hear you guys talk and put things in perspective, remind me that my kid's going to be okay. And as we say in the book, we're like your calm button. And that's what really our work is about, is trying to help parents feel that it's right and it's safe to trust their kids. The kids want their life to work out. Trust their kids as they get older to make their own decisions and solve their own problems. That it's safe and the right to trust them and not worry a lot about them. And so, Ned, you wanted to talk about the little introduction to the book, the principles, or?
Sure. So the Self-Driven Child is 1 million words, and all the signs you could ever want.
Wait, what is it?
Hi there. And our second book, What Do You Say, was really all about language the second chapter from The Self-Driven Child has the title, "I Love You Too Much to Fight With You About Your Homework." And it's a really effective way to sort of change the energy but people would read the self-driven child and say, but in this moment, well, like, what do I say here? So what he's saying was all, you know, when we fights about technology or sleep or homework and chores and on it goes. And this third book is really, it's reflections, it's exercises, it's designed, many fewer words, a lot less science, and really things for us as parents and as educators. So questions we ask ourselves, questions we ask of other people, exercise and reflections, because as much as we all read, you know, a brilliant thing in a paper, or hear a podcast, or talk to a friend who's really wise, we go, that makes so much sense. And then we go right back to doing the same darn thing, because we're all homeostatic, and particularly when we're stressed, we default to our defaults, right? And so in our perspective on this, is it usually takes some practice to make any idea, no matter how wise, to make it a practice. And so we boiled the work from our first two books down into 7 principles, so that you can probably hold on to 7 ideas in ways that are hard to hold on to 17 ideas. And these things, they very much interact and interweave with one another. But the first principle, we'll just kind of roll through them bit by bit, and then we won't give you a dissertation on the entire book, I promise, unless you really want. Okay, nothing really good. The first one is about connection. As Amy said in the introduction, how do we connect well with our kids? And there are a million reasons to connect with the kids. First of all, because you like these little people, and they're kind of cool. Those are really good shoes, by the way. But when we know that the strength of a connection that a child has with a parent or another caregiver is the single strongest protective factor against the effect of stress on developing young brains. Full stop. It's more protective than the wealth or the education of the parents, than the safety of the neighborhood. You're better off growing up in a war zone with a highly nurturing parent than you are growing up in one of the beautiful communities that we live in here, warring with your parents. And as parents, when our kids are struggling, we want to help. And the hardest problems for us to help our kids with are the ones that we don't know about, that they don't tell us about. So we really put connection first, because everything flows from that. Without that strong connection, you're really not in a very strong position, either as a kid to kind of feel courageous and move forward, or as a parent to help kids with some of the struggles that they have.
And the second principle is to be a consultant to your kid, more than their manager or their boss or the homework police. And this is the challenge, because our goal as parents, and so my goal as a parent, I'm a grandparent, my kids are 42 and 39, but my goal was for them to be able to run their own lives successfully before they left home. And I realized that if I did stuff for them that they could do for themselves, or I worked harder to solve a problem than they did, I'd weaken them. Because I wanted them to learn how to make their own decisions, to solve their own problems. And so this idea of being a consultant, I wrote an article in McCall's magazine that I talked about later on CNN, where because I saw so many families, as a neuropsychologist, as a therapist too at that time, and the mother would say, God, I dread dinner time, because after dinner it's like World War III, you're fighting about homework. And I learned in 1986 for the first time that homework doesn't contribute to learning in elementary school. What is all this fighting about? So I started advising parents, just tell your kid, I love you too much to fight about your homework. And I'm willing to do anything I can to help you. I'm willing to be your homework consultant. And I'm willing to sit with you, plan your workout, help you read whatever it is. But you're the most precious thing in the universe to me. I'm not willing to fight about this all the time. And also, I couldn't make you do this. All you'd have to do is close your eyes and flop to the floor. I couldn't make you do this. And so this perspective has 3 major implications. And one is that we want to offer help and advice to our kids, not trying to force it on them. We want to try to minimize force, because you really can't force a kid to do anything. And second is we want to encourage kids to make their own decisions. Yeah. Love it. And kids, it turns out that the kids really can make good decisions for themselves. And even quite young kids can make good decisions if you give them the information they need to make a decision. Because really no one knows them better than they know themselves. And I think that I was talking with a woman recently whose kid I met years ago when he was like 17 or 18. I think I don't remember, but apparently had kind of a pep talk, gave him a little pep talk. He's a little discouraged at age 17. And the mother said, at 35, he's the happiest person I know. She said, he didn't choose a life that I would have chosen for him. He's a rock and roll musician and a successful band, but he still needs to pick up service jobs to make enough money. But he's completely fulfilled, loves everything about his life. And as his fiance says, he's the most confident person I've ever met because he trusts his own decisions. And the mom worked with me for some years and knew this way we think, and just really encouraged him to make the important. We'll help you out. We'll think through the pros and cons, but encourage the kid to make his own decisions. And our idea is you don't want to send a kid off to college where you're still waking up in the morning, you're still making decisions for him, you're still, no, that's not right, I know it's best for you. So the idea is of being consulted. Part of this workbook idea is that when you do that, when you say, okay, I'm going to give more control of your life to you, it lowers your sense of control. And a low sense of control is the most stressful thing in experience. And that's why partly it's so many people read our books and say, God, I love these ideas. They're just hard. They're hard to do because if you got to sit in your hands and zip your lips and let your kids make a choice. So let your kids run their own life a bit. And we think oftentimes we think we can do it better, and we know better. But if you want your kid to grow up with that kind of confidence that they can make their own decision, that they trust their own gut, you don't want them to basically going up to college and still asking what should I do here. You want them to learn to trust themselves, trust their own sense of what's right for me. But it's hard, and that's why we wrote this workbook to try to make it easier for people to apply these principles and know that it's safe and that it's right. And one of the implications of this idea is that we don't want to work harder just to help kids solve their problems than the kids do. Basically, it just weakens them because they think somehow you're the you're the solution to the problem rather than them. And we gave a talk last Thursday night via Zoom, people in the Bay Area, and we asked the parents, mostly mothers on this Zoom meeting, to think about things that they work harder at. It's just problems the kids have, like planning their bar mitzvah, getting their homework done, or doing their chores or whatever. The parents spend more energy than the kid does trying to solve it. And
You've never seen a chat fill up so quickly.
Oh my God, it was incredible. It was just hundreds of responses that.
Well, to be fair, these are mothers. They're very organized. They probably already had it in a spreadsheet.
But so it's not easy, but it's worth it. It's worth it to basically to trust your kids, to encourage them to make their own. I used to tell my 4-year-old, I said that. We're a Jewish family. My wife's a wonderful Jewish mother. She's an incredible cook, and she's always encouraged my kid to eat more. And I take him aside and say, Elliot, you're the expert on you. Nobody else. You're the only one who knows when you're hungry and when you're full. And I think that idea that really you know yourself better than anybody knows. It's a really nice way to relate to kids.
I'm laughing. We had a client who read the book. And they get this idea of changing the energy with "I love you too much to fight with about your homework," and she had she was reading this and she said this to her 7th grade son, and at first he smiled, and then he hugged me, and then he said, "Something wrong with you, Mom?" So it can be an adjustment. The next chapter is simply about healthy expectations, communicating healthy expectations. And we know that, particularly around academics, healthy expectations are incredibly conducive to success academically. But unhealthy ones, toxic ones, lead to some really bad outcomes. And healthy expectations are nothing more than I have confidence that if this is something that matters to you, you can really do all of this. Or if you decide that you want this to go better, I'm confident that you can make it go in the direction that you want. And it's just, I can see you've got the ability to do this, and you can do this if it matters to you. And when Rosenthal effect, when they do this in kids in school, it can wildly accelerate people's performance. The challenge is, it's not hard to fall into toxic expectations where it's simply, well, really, and because you can, I feel that you must. That my positive regard for you, my love for you, is kind of conditional on, are you stepping up or not? And a lot of parents, particularly in places like our area, say, listen, we tell our kids, I don't care how you do. I don't care how you do, just as long as you do your best. Well, the challenge with that too is conditional. Because unconditional love is, I love you no matter how hard you try. I just love you because I love you, full stop. And if you've not yet worked with or had a child who has struggled with things, particularly emotionally, people who struggle emotionally have a really hard time doing well in school. And so a lot of kids who are anxious and depressed, and I've helped raise one of these lovely people who, by the way, turned 21 today, who is killing life, but Lord, for 5 years of her life, getting out of bed was a monumental achievement. Getting to school was like amazing, right? And anything after that was gravy. And so for us, my wife is here in the audience who did more of this heavy lifting than did I. We were at a talk last night with a bunch of clinicians over in McLean, Virginia, talking with Bill's colleagues, and I said, I remember when our daughter was 14, and she was working with a really brilliant therapist, and she said, it will be interesting to see what Katie Johnson decides to do with that remarkable brain of hers when she figures out what it is that matters to her. And we sat on that for 4 years, and she started college. She first attempted college. She was there for 2 days and came home and took a gap year and got diagnosed with autism. That was an adventure. But her second start of college year, she got the highest grades you could possibly get, and then said, I know my tuition only pays, said next semester only pays for this many credits. Would you guys be willing to pay for me to take another class? Jeez. And for a kid who probably missed as many days at school in her senior year as she attended, when Vanessa picked me up off the floor, I'm like, what happened? And we never leaned on her to say, you have to, because for most of you, your children have already won. Hey, thanks mom and dad for the genes, right? And they're sophisticated, educated, well-dressed, very comely people here, right? Your children have already won that. And our job in many ways is to foster and not screw that up. Things go really poorly when we lean into toxic expectations because, among other things, it creates that distance and works against the healthy connections we want. Yeah.
Ned knows that my favorite cartoon that I've ever seen
right.
is these two teenage boys, and one of them says, I'm so sick of my dad. He's constantly on my back about my schoolwork. He's constantly telling me to get those grades up. And last night I couldn't take it anymore. I said, get that salary up. It's a pretty cool perspective.
Yeah.
What is it? Yeah. So we also talk a lot in actually all three of our books about the idea that most kids in this area, and most of the places where we talk, including around the world, that we've done workshops and talk with parents, grow up with kind of a delusional idea of what it takes to have a happy and fulfilled life. And bless your heart. And as Ned knows well, right before the pandemic, I was in Houston talking about the self-driven child, and I met with parents in the evening, and I talked to faculty in the morning, and at noon I had lunch with the student government kids. And I don't remember why, but at one point I asked them, how many of you want to be happy as an adult? And they all kind of went, dog, they raised their hand. And I said, what do you understand it takes to be happy as an adult? And this one kid said, I think I speak for all of us, where we think if you get to a good enough college, everything's set. And I said, has anybody told you
Laurie Santos?
About Laurie Santos at Yale? And said, no, I said, so Laurie Santos was a psychologist at Yale. And at least for many, I don't know if she still does, but for many years she lived in residential dormitories with undergraduates at Yale. And the thing that struck her was these kids got into Yale and they were miserable. Yale didn't do it. And so she started teaching the first course on happiness and well-being. And it quickly became the most popular course in the 300-year history of Yale University. And I said that the idea that where you go to college is the key to your happiness in life is just, it's delusional. It's so out of touch with reality. And I used to call it a mass psychosis. And when I first moved here in 1984, I came from Seattle, and most of my friends, we were happy to go to the University of Washington, and it was plenty good enough for us. And I got here, and within the first couple of years, I had a mother say, I'll only pay for tuition if it's Harvard, Yale, Princeton, or Brown. Everything else is a waste of money. And I said, well, you realize it's kind of crazy, don't you? I mean, most successful people didn't go to those 4 schools. Mm-hmm. And I got a letter from her dad, who was a psychiatrist, saying I was abusive to her for saying that. I thought, this is a different part of the world than I grew up in. And I used to call it a mass psychosis, this idea that prestige and wealth and power are the most important things that really make you happy, and that where you go to college is so important. Your grades follow you the rest of your life, that kind of stuff. And then I realized that there's actual diagnosis called shared delusional disorder, and it's not what it is. I mean, you often think that everybody has the same idea, and all the kids that we work with now, basically in high school, have the I am my grades kind of idea. And the same kind of thing.
We're doing a talk over at VCC and talking with students there.
Yeah.
And this one, I guess you're probably junior, said, we think about every moment of our day through the filter of how would a college admissions person think about how we're spending our time.
Yeah.
Every moment.
Yeah. I tested 2 boys in May, late May of this year. Actually last year, I guess it was, who just got into college. And they're both really high achieving kids, really athletically and academically, and they both got into college in their dreams. As part of my clinical interview, I asked them, are you happy as most kids, more happy, less happy? And they said, a little less happy. I said, are there times when you feel really happy? And both boys said, I felt really happy the day I got into college. Not, I've been really happy since I got into college and the pressure's off. It was the day. It lasted one day. And so in our last 2 books, in this one, we talk about a more accurate model of what makes a happy and fulfilled life. And we talk about Martin Seligman's model of happiness and well-being. Martin Seligman founded the whole field of positive psychology, where he realized 20-some years ago that we studied misery enough. Let's study people who really have happy, have fulfilled. What are they like? And the acronym that he came up with to summarize what research suggests that characterizes people who have a high sense of well-being is PERMA, and it's positive emotion. It's a deep engagement, that kind of flow experience, that really immersed in what you're doing. It's relationships, which are the most predictive of happiness. It's doing things that are meaningful, and accomplishment. Accomplishment is not trivial, but it's 20% of the equation. And so we suggest that we talk with kids more about what we really understand leads to happiness and well-being. And we talk about the difference between happiness and pleasure. There's one of the exercises is thinking about the things in our life that bring us pleasure, but not necessarily long-term happiness. And I think that helping kids grow up with a more accurate model of reality is really very beneficial. It's not easy. I remember so my daughter was 16, she's 42, this is 26 years ago. She came with me when I gave a lecture on the adolescent brain. And I happened to mention that it doesn't really matter. I tell kids I could care less about your grades. Your grades don't, I could flunk all your classes in high school. If you realize that was a bad decision, you go for 30 credits in community college, and you can apply to almost all the colleges in the country, and they don't want to see your high school transcript. And when I tell kids that, when I tell underachievers that, it motivates them to work harder. Because they figure, I've already screwed up my whole life. Right? So
when you told that to Jora, she called BS on it.
So she heard me talking like this, and she says, "You don't really believe that." Yeah, I do. I said, I'll tell you what, I'll offer you $100 for a C, because she's a great student, and she never took me up on it. But I wanted to know that I said, I want you to be able to see that C is not going to ruin your life. So, in any case, I think that this is one of my real concerns about kids just not understanding. Just have really that there's so many different ways you can make it in this world, and so many times you can fail, and still create a meaningful life. The kids have the idea that this is all this straight march up the road to success, and you never screw up, you never fail, you never take a break. It's just not true.
It's particularly interesting for kids who are struggling, where it's really stressful if you've got a kid who's having a hard time, right? And then we as parents really want to move our kids out of that hard space that they're in. And so one of the realizations we had between our first and second book is when a lot of times when parents are asking, how do I motivate my kid to? How do I get him to, engage in school more, take things more seriously, be more grown up, whatever, stop smoking drugs, whatever it happens to be, what they're really saying is, how do I change my kid? And the thing that's hard is you don't change anyone against their will. If they want help changing, then you can do that. And the part that's hard is parents who are concerned about the path the kid is on, the more we argue all the reasons why you have to stop, the more they argue the other side. And particularly for kids who are ambivalent, when they're stuck in a hard place, they're stuck in a hard place because the reasons for and the reasons why not to can feel just as compelling. And then it's like a seesaw, when we argue one side of the equation, they tend to argue the other side. And even those really good reasons to do the better thing, we've so clearly articulated, Bill's second favorite cartoon. Dad's got these two kids by the nape of the neck. Now listen up, boys, and listen up good. I'm only going to tell you this 1,000,000 times. And kids just argue the other side. And so this is something we hadn't realized. And so in our second book, we talk about motivational interviewing, which is a really effective practice used by a lot of therapists, where you're trying to create space for people to articulate for themselves the reasons to change. Because if I give the reason to my daughter, she's like, right, and is now tainted. When she discovers it for herself, or we have a conversation where it burbles up, it's much more powerful. So the thing we did with Palo Alto was, all right, everybody last name A through M. Think about a thing that you really know your kid's gonna do, and write down all the reasons you can think of for the reason why to take school more seriously, engage more, be nicer to your little sister, whatever. Okay, go. Everybody last names N through Z. Now articulate, parry them for every reason why to do this, all the feelings why your kid doesn't want to do this. Oh, it was so juicy, And it's a really interesting exercise for us to do as parents when you realize that the reasons to and the reasons why not to, their feelings for and their feelings against. And when you can really put your head in the headspace of someone else who's struggling, you realize, oh, this is complicated. This isn't nearly as clear as, oh, obviously you just need to. It's way more complex for that. And that it's a really nice way to sort of feel more empathy and go back to that connection that we started with. And we have exercise about reflective listening. And so when any person feels like someone else is working really hard to understand their perspective on it, for any of us, when you feel like someone understands where you're coming from, what you're struggling with, even particularly when you're struggling, it really lowers emotional charge, right? And you can just relax because you feel like you're understood. And the thing about feeling relaxed is it frees up all those executive functions that we care so much about with young people. But for me, most importantly, it loosens up our emotional flexibility. And so a kid who's been beating herself up over and over about, I only got a B+ in this, I'm never going to Harvard now. And you're trying to get her to see, sweetheart, there's so many, no, you don't understand, Dad, you don't understand, Dad, you don't understand, Dad. And you say, it must be really hard to have worked that hard all this time and to fall short on this grade when it matters so much to you. I get it. Just feeling understood like that, because she doesn't want to keep torturing herself for falling short of perfect. Nobody wants to, right? But when we tell her you don't have to be perfect, she'd fight. Anyone ever had this experience? Right? And so it's a really, again, so many of these things are reflections and activities for us to do, because as much as all of us would like to wave a magic wand and change our children, not you, you're perfect, but everybody, the rest of us, right? We know it doesn't really work. And again, as Bill said before, we have the low sense of control. And so these exercises are really I didn't bring along little Bill. Anyway, these exercises, there was, sorry, I forgot last night, when I was doing the audiobook for our second book, Bill and I were gonna go back and forth, but he couldn't because he had grandchildren who hadn't been vaccinated yet. And so I asked my daughter, I said, could you make like a Bill Stixrud sock puppet? And I have a little, I should have brought it, and it's basically, well, it's this jacket with a purple tie, and so it's a little Bill. Anyway, so I always think about having a little Bill in your pocket. So these exercises.
It's embarrassing. On Valentine's Day, we gave a talk, and he brought the puppet. I was wearing the exact same outfit.
It's a good look. It's a good look. Anyway, so you know, I'm a particular fan of that chapter on the exercises that are in there, because the hardest thing for me, at least as a parent, is when I have a kid who's having a hard time, and you want so much, and the more you pull, the more it seems they just get stuck.
Yeah.
And we change them by changing our energy.
Well, that's the thing. We're so struck by every place we look when you're trying to. When we realize that when people say, "How do I get my kid to do this?" I mean, how do I change my kid? And we studied the science of change. In every place we look, the idea is that if you try to help somebody change, try to get somebody to change who's not asking you to help them change, what you get every time is conflict and resistance. It's a powerful idea. And I remember a few years ago, I tested a kid who was going into 8th grade in a Catholic school, and just a lovely kid. But he had learning disabilities, he had ADHD, he had language disorders. The school was really hard for him. And so I go to a school meeting. It's kind of maybe December of 8th grade year. And in Catholic schools, they're applying out to Catholic high schools. And the principal says he's getting low C's and some D's. He'll have trouble getting into the high schools. And he says, I've had 2 conversations with him. You gotta get these grades up, kind of a come to Jesus talk with him.
Catholic school.
Yeah, right.
They're closer.
Right.
We know.
Yeah. And it just hasn't taken. He's just not working hard enough. And I said, I loved it. He's a great principal. I said, respectfully, I don't think it's lost in this kid that if he does better in school, he'll have more high school options. I also think it's inconceivable that he hasn't tried to do better. But school's hard. He's probably had the experience of trying to do better, and just not got his grades been about the same. So why bother? I also know that the major manifestation of anxiety is you avoid stuff. And right now, this is so stressful for him that he'll do everything he can to avoid it. Why don't you just tell him that when you're 30, nobody's going to ever care where you go to high school. It's just not that big a deal. Don't worry about it. I want you to work hard, and I want you to develop yourself. I want you to develop these skills. But I don't want you to think that somehow, if you don't get into a great high school, then all is lost. And they took that perspective with him. And actually, the adults in the kid's life stopped working harder than he did. They said, I love you too much to work harder. And by the end of the year, this kid had started to turn things around. And he started 9th grade at St. John's. And he was so self-aware. And parents were encouraging him. He ran his life so beautifully in high school. And he's, I think, his 3rd year in college now as a psychology major. But just that idea of trying to change people by you need to do this, you need to do this, that, it just never works. So, how many more principles?
Only 11. No, I'm teasing.
Yeah.
There's a non-extra presence
Yeah.
and radical
All
concept.
right.
Do you want to do one more and then see
Yeah.
if there are any
Yeah.
questions?
Yeah.
Good.
Or comments? Or,
So,
yeah.
yeah. So we talk in our books about the idea of being a non-anxious presence. And we didn't make this term up. There's a guy named Edwin Friedman, who is a rabbi and a family therapist and consultant, who studied systems, family systems and corporate systems. And he concluded that systems work best if the people in charge, the leaders, are not highly anxious and emotionally reactive. And so, and the idea, it just makes sense. I mean, I did a series of workshops at the Sheridan School years ago, I think before you were there, Phyllis, on this idea of being a non-anxious presence. Because if you got a 2-year-old who's having a tantrum, it's much easier to handle if you stay calm.
Just calm down.
Yeah. You know, if you got a 15-year-old who does something you don't like, it's really, you can be much more effective in helping the kid if you don't overreact. And so, it's the goal is not to be chill all the time. I mean, that'd be fine. But the goal is just the idea that it's right for me to not be anxious, not be worried all the time. And in the workbook, you know, we talk about ways that we can move in that direction of being a non-anxious presence in our family. And there's talk about various things, including we always come back to taking a long view about your kid. And I've worked with kids now for over 40 years, and I've been saying the last few months that I wish I could implant in your brains, those of you, the parents' brains, the neurons in my brain that have met at least 1,000 kids. I've worked with 1,000 kids who were a complete disaster at one point in their life, who turned out great. I just mentioned last night that, I think I mentioned last night, but that I followed this kid. Last time I saw him, he's in 17. And he's in a therapeutic boarding school, all 4 years of high school. And when I saw him, all he wanted to do is get out of school and do stuff that's probably not so good for him, and because he's turning 18, the last time I saw him. And he just opened his own practice as a clinical neuropsychologist in Bellevue, Washington. And just, I wouldn't have predicted that, you know, when it was the last time. And I've seen 1,000 kids like that. And so when I see kids who are not doing well, I say, I don't worry about you. Your brain's going to be completely different in 3 years. So part of it is taking this long view. And you want to talk about this stuff?
Yeah, and the other big sort of category, from the way that we think about it, is when there's more stress coming into a nervous system, right, or a family system, or a school system, or our whole country right now. Really, if you don't have healthy ways to pull stress out of your nervous system, your family system, bad things are going to happen, right? When you think about during COVID, right, the amount of drinking through the roof, domestic violence through the roof, political discord, on and on it goes, because people who have a dysregulated nervous system, a really poor at inhibition, they don't do empathy well, they have a hard time solving problems, they have a hard time being emotionally flexible. And so part of our work is for any of us to take seriously what we can do as adults in the lives of young people, so that kind of be a stress sponge for them. And this is, I'll make a plug for one thing, but there are many different ways to pull stress out of your system. And people talk about self-care, and I really want to sort of deepen the thinking on that. This isn't just, it's really valuable to go and have coffee with your friend. It's unrushed, and take time to sort of time out. But there's kind of stress relief, right? Stopping the influence of stress, and there's stress release, what actually pulls that out of your nervous system. And so I'm going to pick on my wife Vanessa since she's here. When I was recording the audiobook for What Do You Say, again, Bill were doing this stuff, and I came out of the studio the first day and just calling her up and telling her about the experience. And our son, who at that point was a camp counselor, he'd started having migraines, and they sort of run in Vanessa's side of the family. I thought, well, he's 19 now, maybe that's what's going on. And I said, so how is he? She said, well, I just had him on the phone. Let me call him up. And so we three are having a phone call, and as we're talking, how much ibuprofen is too much, and you get enough water, and he drops a word, like, kind of weird. And a few more sentences, and he drops another word. Okay, and a few more sentences, just gibberish, absolute gibberish. Now, I'd done some emergency medicine. I'm thinking he's having a stroke. So Vanessa, do me a favor, call me on the line, sweetheart. Don't hang up, we're connected. Matthew, I'll be right back. Call 911, call the camp director, call the nurse, call. I'm gonna go back and talk to him. So, Matthew, I'm having a little bit of a hard time understanding. Can we just do some yes/no questions? You do this with emergency medicine. So can you say yes? He says yes. And can you say no? He says no. I said, tell me again your first, middle, and last name. Avocado, toothbrush, toast. Huh. Well, something's not quite right here. So fast forward, brain tumor. He's fine now. But the tumor was pressing down on optic nerve and language centers. It was a lot. So life flight surgery, gap semester at Children's National, chemotherapy. He's great now, but a lot. And so Vanessa and I were out to dinner about 3 weeks into this adventure, and she looked at me and she said, I've had 3 people ask me, how are you so calm about all this? Now, granted, we at that point had met with the team and were pretty confident about the plan that they had, and there was a path through these woods. But she said, honestly, I think it's the meditation. Now, Bill's been practicing something called transcendental meditation for 51 years. I've been at this for, I don't know, I'm not very good at dates, a long time. And Vanessa, I don't know, probably 3 years at that point, something. Now, Vanessa is incredibly bright, has executive functions out her ears, can handle anything, but she's not from a family that's wired to be non-anxious. What's the term I'm looking for? Neurotic. Yes. I mean, I love her parents, but your mom is not exactly this, right? And so this was a tool for her when we had a lot coming at us to get a lot out of us. And so I say this, that for all of us who are, overachieving, DC or parents, where we're taking care of children and spouses and parents and workplaces and on, and we feel like we're so committed to those things, and the things we need to do for ourselves feel like it's too selfish, we shouldn't be doing this for ourselves. But if we go back to where we started with, connection, that the things that we do to help ourselves move in the direction of being a non-anxious presence, it's good for all of this. It's good for us, and it's good for every single person you meet. This would just be much more effective and help them be more effective.
Because I've been meditating, my wife and I have been meditating for so many years, and I've been doing yoga 3 times a week for 50 years.
He's very bendy. Make him show you something.
Not so much anymore. I was at one point. But my kids always thought we were really weird. A little embarrassed by this cartoon and all kind of parents. And my son, about 4 or 5 years ago, he said, it was a little embarrassing. We thought you were pretty weird. But what I remember about how calm our family was. And on a lighter note, I know this family where the mother and her 17-year-old autistic kid learned TM, transcendental meditation, and the mother just saw this amazing change in her kid and in herself, and she knew this newspaper reporter and said, "Would you do a story on us?" So she interviews the reporter interviews the 17-year-old boy, says, "What does meditation do?" He said, "It calms the mind and it calms the mom." More recently, the Herndon, Virginia Police Department, the whole police department learned TM because there's dozens of studies showing it's so effective for trauma, and these policemen just have so much experience of trauma. It's because it's so deeply relaxing that it just heals trauma without having to revisit. It's really very powerful thing. But the chief of the police was saying that she'd been meditating. She was at some kind of banquet and saying the whole department's meditating. She said that I was meditating very regularly, twice a day for 3 or 4 months, and then I got busy and I stopped for a while. And my daughter, who's 10 years old, said, "Mom," he said, "you got to start meditating again. You're a much better mom when you meditate." So I think that for me, it's just a matter of these days, it's hard to find anybody who describes themselves as peaceful or calm. I think life is so fast-paced. We're all so tired. Because life is just so fast-paced. It's so stressful that we, as Ned said, we need some kind of practice. We need to develop things in our life that we had that experience of feeling calm inside, because at the deepest level of your own mind is completely calm and peaceful. And I think that having that, people find different ways to do that. But we feel it's becoming increasingly important as life becomes more stressful and more fast-paced to build in more what we call radical downtime, basically, kind of really calming the mind and body.
That's our story. We're sticking with it.
That's right.
Any questions or comments or examples?
Thank you for
You
coming.
could ask.
Yes.
them.
I would like to know what Who or what do you credit for your wisdom? Each of you.
I credit him.
Oh. I think that I realized pretty actually when I did my internship at Children's Hospital in Boston in pediatric psychology, and there's a pediatrician there by the name of Barry Brazelton, who was the most famous pediatrician in the world at that time. And what people told me was he worked with kids who were failure to thrive because he wouldn't eat. And Barry Brazelton couldn't make them eat.
Mm.
And I realized you really can't make somebody, you can't make an infant. You can't try to make a baby go to sleep. Try to stop crying. You know, and I realized that my own kids, I couldn't make them do anything. And so partly for me, that was what the main thing for me was realizing that I've got to find different ways of encouraging my kids and influencing my kids and helping them find their own motivation. Because if I tried to use force, if I thought I was supposed to be able to make them, that it just didn't work. And what I've been telling people lately is that when you realize that you really can't make a kid turn out the way you think they should, or be who you think they should be, it's a little scary at first, but it's so liberating after that, because theoretically it couldn't be your responsibility to make sure they always do their homework or always do their chores, or they always say thank you to grandma, like that. It couldn't be your responsibility. And so your relationship becomes more where you want your kid, you let your kid know at every stage in life you're perfect. I love you exactly as you are. I love you no matter what you do, no matter what you say, no matter how hard you work. And you help them figure out how to make their life as successful as they want it to be. But I would say that experience that you really can't make even an infant do something is really transformative.
Well, I've spent like 50,000 hours one-on-one with other people's teenagers, and I mean, a lot of the great educators all over the place. I am lucky in being able to do that one-on-one and really just kind of see what's effective, you know. And for all of us, and you all know incredibly wise people in your lives, and you're a great source of wisdom to people around you. I don't think there's a deficit of good ideas anywhere. There is a deficit of people maybe applying good ideas. I won't make it political, but there's, you know, and so those things are always there. You know, for me, I think there's I try to pay attention to what's effective and try to be open to that. And I'm just endlessly curious. You know, I mean, Phyllis has 2 incredible books. You know, we have friends. I mean, there's information all the while, but just constantly trying to pay attention what's effective with this child or that child. And the challenging part, the good and the bad. There's no one recipe for any kid. I mean, people grow up in all corners of the world with very different parenting styles, with very different cultures, with very different communities. And so there are lots of ways that children can grow up and be successful. And so that's on the one hand, like, give me the rule book. Well, there is no one rule book because every child is different. But I just try to pay attention to what's effective.
Thank you.
Teenagers are fun. They will be fun. They'll be great. How old are you?
10.
What's the coolest thing about being 10?
I don't know.
Anything other than that you're doing now that you didn't do when you were 9?
Not really.
You're killing me here.
My major memory, my primary memory when I was 10, was my grandmother for Christmas. He gave me this big stuffed animal. It was huge. It was kind of embarrassing. I saw myself as an athlete, and it's embarrassing. But secretly I loved it. I'll mention too. In 2008, I was at a lecture. I was at a conference on stress, and for around that time I started studying what stress does to the brain. And there's a neuroscientist there who said, I defy you to think of anything in life that makes life stressful that you can't summarize with the acronym NUTS. It's novelty, unpredictability, perceived threat, and a low sense of control. And she said that the most stressful thing by far is a low sense of control. And at that time, I was studying effects of stress in the brain and realizing that all the challenges, all the mental health challenges that young people have, that young adults have, are twice as bad as teenagers do now. they're all related to just stress. They're all stress-related conditions, and the most stressful thing you can experience is a low sense of control. And so that the idea of encouraging kids to run their own life, to practice making their decisions, have that sense of control. They aren't helpless. They aren't hopeless. They aren't chronically overwhelmed or exhausted. That was a really great thing for me to learn. I used the line. Any other thoughts or questions? Yeah.
How do you deal with a narcissistic child?
How do you deal with a narcissistic child?
Why are you laughing at me?
It's a very sophisticated question. For a 10-year-old.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what does the narcissistic child do that's hard to deal with?
A lot.
Like,
They're a narcissist for one.
but what did they do that makes it hard to deal with?
Lack of empathy. Yeah. Understand.
So, I'm going to tell you something that if this makes sense to you, it's going to change your life. Which is that they're who they're supposed to be. That's the way they're wired. You can't change them. And what you can do is understand that they're doing the best they can. That narcissists, they see the world differently, and they're doing the best you can. And what you do is you take care of yourself. And if they make you feel bad, you talk to them about it. You still make you feel bad. You say, I really sorry. Can you be around? Is this are we talking about somebody in school or sibling? Let's talk a little bit after. But it's a really good question, and certainly it's not easy.
And my hunch is that you're someone who cares a lot about other people, and knowing other people don't show that same care to you, that's hard. I'd be upset by that too.
And if you just understand that they really can't give you have empathy or understanding, that okay, you don't expect it from them.
Is there a question in the back?
I was just thinking, wondering what your advice would be, your thoughts would be. You mentioned at the beginning of this conversation that like the area that we live in. So, but most of the book and thoughts are like concentrating on your relationship with your child, or like just focusing on the child. What's the advice? Like, let's say you're doing what you're saying to do with your child, but you're basically swimming upstream because not everybody in the area or in the cohort or whatever are reading your books and implementing the same thing.
Yeah.
So you can say all
We're working
these-
on that.
Exactly. Have more of these. But like, what do you do when your child feels like your parenting style is moving against the stream, right?
Well, I'm curious to explore that. What a few assumptions that I have in there, right? And so, for us to be really clear, what we're talking about is not sort of like laissez-faire parenting, like kids do whatever they want, right? It's squarely in what's called authoritative parenting, rather than authoritarian. You have to do it my way, or laissez-faire, do whatever you want. And 60 years of research have shown that this authoritative, we have natural authority. We're older, we're taller, we have credit cards, right? We have natural authority, right? But there are limits, there are restrictions, there are expectations, but we're not controlling everything that they do. A lot of people, the children of other people we may see, who seem to be performing or overperforming because they're being pushed relentlessly. It will be that they fall into perfectionistic modes, and it looks great for a while. And then eventually the relationships fray, kids develop substance use disorders and eating disorders and all kinds of maladaptive coping strategies, because that chronic stress it's so bad to nervous systems. And if there's no other way to address that, people use all these maladaptive approaches. And we both see a lot of folks who, it looks perfect on paper, A's everywhere and da-da-da, but it ends up being a hot mess. And from our experience, and we've been between the two of us in 65 years with kids, it's not a choice between they're being successful and parenting in ways that are healthy and put the privacy of this relationship. Because I mean, the thing to start with, children want their lives to work out. They want to be successful. Even kids who are struggling like nobody's business, they want their lives to work out. And for the kids who are pushed, they'll step up, but there's a really big long-term cost for that short-term performance. You know, I care a lot more about long-term brains than short-term grades, because those grades don't. I mean, 20 years down the road, where you know, it's not a trade-off that we need to make, and sure not one we want to make.
And I'll add that one of the things I learned when I did therapy for many years with kids was that parents would oftentimes ask me to talk them out of, you know, in this area, this very blue area where kids would be fascinated with guns or weapons, or, you know, and I was supposed to talk them out of it. And I can't talk about it. And I said to parents, just tell your kid, you know, there's a lot of people are just this stuff. It's pretty. I see what you like about that. And when they did that, changed the energy from disapproving, that being afraid of it, to not trying to talk them out of it. The kid just got interested in something else. And the point here is, in terms of these achievement pressures of kids, it's this idea that excessive pressure to excel is the fourth leading cause of unwellness in adolescence, behind only poverty, trauma, and discrimination. But you can't talk kids who want to be high achieving, their friends are all competitive. You can't talk them out of it. What I would recommend is saying that we have a conversation, multiple conversations, and say, I know that what you're hearing from a lot of your friends and your teachers is that the most important thing are your grades, kind of thing. I just want you to know that from my perspective, it's not true. That your grades don't predict very well how successful you are in life. That many top students really are they're successful, but they're miserable. You're wired in a wonderful way, but don't try. I just don't want to feel like you're trying to talk them out of it, because that ambivalence. Mm-hmm. Kids love the idea. They want to see life in a more healthy way. They want to, but they're ambivalent about it. And so I think letting kids, having a proper conversation, we say, I just want you to know I see it different. I do that a lot with kids. I see a lot of kids who think they're very smart. I'm a neuropsychologist, and I'll see that they're in fact they're really smart. But I'll say to them that I'm not going to try to take that away from you. If that's the way you see it, I respect that. I see it really differently though. And if you're interested, I'll tell you how I see it. And then they're craving to hear how I see it. And I can tell them in a way that I'm much more likely than it was, because they've been told a million times, you're so smart. But they hang on to that, like, maybe it's self-protection. So the main thing is, I think we can help kids, is to let them know that we see it differently, but in a respectful way. And also, the last chapter in the book, it's about school. And it's about changing schools to make them more user-friendly for kids. And
less brain toxic.
Well, yeah, we gave a lecture in October called Brainless Education, because if you look at the way most schools operate, you'd never have any idea that anybody knows anything about the brain, that they've learned anything from 40 years of neuroscience. You just never know. High school kids start at 7:20. Kids are playing in kindergarten. They're just like the worst first grades used to be. They don't play. So I think that we're trying to change. We're working with a lot of educators. They're trying to give kids more control of their lives in school. God, I was just talking to parents today of a 7th grader who just is constantly fighting to get him to do anything related to school. And he self-studies all the stuff he's interested in. He becomes encyclopedic about stuff. And yet nobody at school works with that, uses that energy. They just fight that energy, trying to do this other stuff. And so I think that if we can change schools, it's going to make it so much easier for all of us. And I think that
there's a big lecture we gave, and it made the point of it, instead of thinking schools as places of learning, but of human development.
Yeah.
Because that's where this 12 years ago, like, we got them on down here, it's okay.
Yeah.
Let's take one more question and then we will sign books, and someone's got to drink that wine over there. No, you're not you. There's cookies over there though, I think so.
You can go.
Is there another question?
Oh,
Yes,
sorry.
yeah.
What is your approach on rules? So,
Boarding school. Sorry, teasing.
let's say it is something that, really isn't negotiable. It's something that might be unsafe or, this is not a personal example.
Yeah.
Someone
I'm
you know.
using it to be extreme.
Yeah.
Let's say your kid drinks and drives.
Mm.
So that's like not negotiable. I can't say, what's best for you against, does it happen?
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
that, I'm gonna leave it up to you. By the way, I think you guys are brilliant, and I love to
Yeah, no, it's a
hear all
great,
of
it's a
this.
great question.
So, but I'm just curious on the approach of something that's just like really not.
Yeah,
okay
I mean,
for
there
them
are
to
a couple thoughts come to mind. One, Ross Greene has this wonderful, if you know Ross Greene, he talks about a book called The Explosive Child, and work with the most, just intensely oppositional children that exist, right? If you don't do this, I'm gonna nail you to the wall. Go walk down to the basement and get the hammer and say, go for it, right? And his point was, you couldn't make them do anything. And he just talks about putting things in baskets, right? There are things that, 4-year-old who wants to cross the street by herself. Thank you, no. I'll pick you up and kick and scream. I will carry you across the street, right? I want to wear plaid shirt and stripe. Who cares, right? But most things, end up being more in the middle. And for those things, we kind of negotiate, right? For something, there's a whole chapter in our second book about what about expectations? And so things like this, when it's a health thing, it's like, listen, I think that I caught wind that you were drinking last night and you didn't drive. It's not safe. Because your dad, I can't let you do that. So you're just not going to drive a car for the next 3 weeks. We'll talk about this. But I can't allow you to use operate a vehicle when you might be impaired, because you could hurt yourself so grievously and someone else as well. So we really need to think about this. Now, I'd love to know kind of why you got in that position and what we can do differently and do, Uber and blah, 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 blah. But for now, we're going to take a big time out on that. But very few things are really at that place where people think, but if you don't get this, you're going to take this class and run class, and then you'll end up living in a van down by the river. And it's not hard for us as parents to go from you took calculus and you took statistics instead of calculus, you're going to be a drug dealer. Right? I mean, it's not.
Clearly.
It's not right. It's not hard for people. Not hard for people to do that.
No, I think that we like the idea of working out rules as a family, and kind of getting where everybody's kind of buying in our family rules, the way our family operates. And I think that I like to think about where do we have leverage, and certainly with driving, you have leverage over whether, unless the kid has his own car, you pay his insurance, and it's really, but you letting the kid know that I can't know. Because you could go for a month and okay, he's not drinking. You could go out and I can't police you every night. And just letting kids know. I learned years ago that the best way to help kids stay safe is to let them know I can't keep you safe. I can't. I'm not going to monitor you all the time. I'm not using Life 360. I trust you. I trust you can figure out your life. If you need help, I'm always here for you. But I think you help kids, because oftentimes kids, they'll take a risk because they know that parents will bail them out. My mom and dad have my back. But you say, I really can't keep you safe. I think it has a really powerful effect on kids. And letting them know that, one line that I advise parents to use is that, I don't want to feel like, if I let you do something I knew was really dangerous, and I'm letting you do it, it's like I'm buying you drugs or something, I'm not going to do it. And so if there's evidence that you're drinking and driving, then I'm taking it easy for a month or 2, whatever, and then I want you to try it again.
Yeah.
But certainly, this idea is not kids make all their own decisions, and there's no that they're part of the family, they're part of society.
And I would just end with this last point, that whether it's around homework or being nice to your, other people or keeping yourself safe, our energy has to shift from how do we keep our kids safe, to how do they learn to keep themselves safe.
Yeah.
And there's a story in The Self-Driven Child where I talk about my wife was, my wife was helping Matthew do homework, and she's reminded me, hey, well, why didn't you hand that in? And he said, well, because you didn't remind me, like what I said. We're going to correct this right now. And we really made this hard pivot towards, And again, she's super organized. You know, is there a way that I can help? And sometimes, you know, Katie still asks, will you proofread my paper? You know, and we'll ask for help, but we just got out of the job of, you know, pursue and rescue. And the story that's in our second book was, you know, really out of this real pivot towards we will help in any way we can, but we're not going to be responsible. So we were out for a walk. He was a sophomore in high school. There was a big dance. There was a party that night. This was his first like real high school party that wasn't put on by someone's parents, right? And so he said, I got a question. They started dancing around, and he finally got around to asking, what do I do if people are drinking alcohol there? This is a real question, right? And this is his first party, and he didn't know how we were going to acclimate. Alcohol, whose party is this? We could have, you know, demanded who'd know who it was and shut the whole thing down and kill his social life before it even got started. This is a vulnerable question, right? But it's also, with those hard questions, this incredible opportunity for connection and to really convey what are the things that we think matter. And so, well, tell me more about this. Well, blah, blah, blah. He finally comes around to the story about a girl who'd been at this party, at some party that he'd heard about, who got really, really sick, like to the point that she's likely gonna die, right? And so someone called 911. The sirens show up, everybody flees like roaches and with the light turned on, right? Except for this one girl who stays Good Samaritan to help this girl who's really in a mess. It was told to him as a cautionary tale because this girl had then gotten a $500 citation to be there where alcohol is being served. I don't think she was drinking herself, but she got pasted with $500, which is a lot of babysitting money, right? And so he had heard this from his friends of like, don't be there when bad things happen. So, well, what do I do if I'm in a situation where bad things are happening? And I said, it's a really good question. That's a hard place to be. I said, if I may, there's another way to look at this. What do you mean? Well, one could credibly argue that this girl paid $500 undeservedly of her own money to save the life of another child. What an opportunity, right, to talk about things that we think matter as parents, as human beings, as empathetic, you know, human beings, right? And it would never have come around if, I don't think it would have come around if we had a different approach to this. So our energy is to help him learn to keep himself safe, and we had conversations about that. But all these things are opportunities to deepen connection, to be the consultant, and help kids learn how to think on their own when we're not there to help them think on their own.
Good question, though.
But that is a good question.